What an honor it is to bring in a cat who came over to this country at a very different time. In fact, when jazz and democracy were coexisting in a pretty untethered way. And, the reality is that my guest came up being part of the conversation, listening through both ears, and reacting spontaneously in the moment based on everybody's inner time feel, which made the music feel so good. He continues to do it today. Hendrik Meurkens, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hello, hello.
Hello, sir. Lenny White was on the bandstand with Jackie McLean at 13 years old. Famadou Don Moy was on the bandstand with his elders. They'd kick him off the bandstand. But the point is that these cats were raised in a family. And I'm just going to read some of these names off, and I want to know if any of them resonate with you. Manfred Schoof, Ak van Rooyen, Albert Mangelsdorf, Rudy Fusers, Emil Mangelsdorf, Heinz Sauer, Gerd Dudek, Michael Pills, Willie Johans, Wolfgang Downer, Ralph Hubner, Gunter Lentz.
Yeah, of course. These are the classic guys from the German, not only German, the European jazz scene, mostly German. One of the guys, Ak van Rooyen, was Dutch. He just passed away. So these are the guys that after the war they were the pioneers of jazz in Germany. But Germany is just one of many countries in Europe. Europe is, as you know, a lot of small little countries, and each country has an independent scene. Sometimes they mix, sometimes they don't. But that makes for a lot of geographic variety. So we have in Germany, that's where I'm from, these guys that you mentioned, yes, I heard them, some of them I played with, but they were also another generation. I left 30 years ago, and they were really active when I was even too small to do anything. I just know they were there.
Absolutely. I found this album recorded live at the Domicile, Munich, July 11th, 71. And all these cats are playing. I mean, you were 14, 15 years old.
Yes.
And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but cats were in the clubs. There was no age. Were you in the clubs at 13? Can you talk a
Not
little?
at 13, but around the times, pretty much after that. I don't think there was any rules, any laws like that. I don't think there's anything that minors couldn't go into the clubs. I don't think that was an issue. The issue is really, how do you get home? Does somebody drive you, or do you take the subway or whatever? That was the issue. Also, I'm from Hamburg, which is in the north. Hamburg did not have the fattest and healthiest of the jazz scenes. Domicile was in Munich. That was happening. Then Cologne was happening. Berlin was happening. Frankfurt was happening. Hamburg was not really a major jazz town. They had the big band there, the NDR big band, which still exists. And that brought a few Americans over there and other great players that was their day gig, so to speak. But it wasn't really a major jazz town.
Okay, so I want to, Hendrik, I love the way you're framing this. When you say a real jazz town, you're talking about people of color, basically.
No, people of color are not even an issue. There are no people of color in Germany. There were a few here and there. Jazz, I meant, activity. This Frankfurt had much more going on. Also, geographically, Frankfurt is in the middle, and it's close to Holland and France and all that. Munich is close to Switzerland and Austria and Italy. Hamburg is not really close to anything, maybe Denmark, but I don't know why that was. I left for a reason. If
Absolutely.
I wouldn't feel the need to come here. I just always felt it wasn't really a jazz town. I still think it isn't.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, can you talk about your growing up, maybe a group that I'm fascinated with time feel, because my generation at 45 years old, my generation and younger, they really play to a clock. The drummers do. They play to a click.
Yes.
They play very quantized. And I don't care if these cats that we talked about earlier were a different generation, but you're part of a different generation that still came up with the feeling of a round rhythm. And I wanted you to talk about an early ensemble or trio that you might have put together that was, in fact, a drummerless trio.
A drummer-less trio?
Yes, like basically.
Not really. I always looked for the conservative rhythm section, bass, drums, piano to play with me. That was always, and still to this day, is kind of what I do most of the time, unless it's a New York restaurant gig, because there are lots of gigs here in the city where you can play, and drums is either plowed or there's no room for it. So I came to the trio later on when I came here already. Over there, I was really into regular rhythm sections.
Well, can you talk a little bit about regardless of whether it was really a happening scene in Hamburg, can you talk about some formative learning experience for you? Maybe it was even a humbling experience, but ultimately you can look back on it and say, yeah, that made me a stronger person and player.
Well, Hamburg has a very strong old-time Dixieland jazz scene. Well, I don't know, there are many words for it. New Orleans jazz, Dixieland, old-time, the pre-swing version of jazz, New Orleans.
Absolutely.
They have and they still have it. There's a huge scene there in northern Germany, especially Hamburg. So those were the gigs that I did. I was part of a band, although I played vibes at the time. Of course, vibes isn't a traditional instrument, but they liked it, and that is what I did before I came to Berkeley when I was 19 years old. I was really a pre-swing vibes player, and there were lots of things to do, and I was playing a lot. At some point, I had a driver's license. Before that, I don't even remember how I got my vibes to the gigs. But
yes, you do, dude. You were lugging them on your back or something, dude.
Either somebody picked me up or the parents, or I don't know how. But that's kind of my upbringing is pre-swing jazz. That's what I learned first.
Can you just talk a little bit about how you fit your vibes into that? I don't recall. I mean, whatever you want to label that music as, Dixieland, New Orleans.
Yes.
I can't recall any vibes players. So
no, there is not, but it's not really pure. There were some really pure New Orleans bands, and of course I didn't play with them. It's more like a general, let's say pre-modern jazz thing, pre-bebop.
I did.
Kind of swing, kind of Dixieland, depending on the instrumentation. Sometimes you have a saxophone, sometimes you have a clarinet. It's not really completely a pure style, but it is pre-bebop. That you can say. And vibes worked. Not for the pure New Orleans dudes. They wouldn't want to know about it. But anybody except those, they liked it.
You're talking about if you had a chance to play with the original Cats, they wouldn't have been into it. But the Cats in Hamburg were into it.
No, I mean in Hamburg, the New Orleans guys in Hamburg, what they consider themselves purists.
Yes, okay, right.
Those are the guys. They were still German. I mean, Germans are also very, they think in categories, and they need to put something in a certain. They have to label something. Once you label your stuff New Orleans jazz, then there's no vibraphone. It's not very flexible for those guys. But other than those few guys. No, I was playing a lot, and something that would be maybe pre-bebop.
Fascinating. So, let me be clear: the traditional Cats didn't. So you basically were going. You had to kind of peel off on your own and create your own ensembles. Is that fair to say, or did you actually play with the? Can you talk about some of that early formative experience with the vibes? You said the language of the. Obviously, it was pre-modern jazz, but being born in 1957, you definitely were hearing the sounds of bebop over, Radio Free America, whatever you were listening to. There had to have been bebop there.
I mean, I like bebop. I love bebop. I was probably sometimes more modern than the other guys, but the gigs were not, we didn't play bebop tunes. We played swing tunes. We played traditional jazz tunes. What I played over it is another story. But I didn't really have my own band much before I came back from Berkeley. I went to Berkeley for 3 years, and then I came back. And after that, I was more active as a leader. Before I went to Berkeley, I was really just a sideman with several bands over there playing that style.
Was there a circuit? I mean, obviously, like you said, Europe is really broken up into a bunch of smaller countries, but, even Billy Cobham, I was interviewing him yesterday, and he was just talking about, all this, mainly when you came over to Berkeley, but in that early 70s time, there was such a fertile music scene in the United States, and yet guys like Dexter Gordon and Kluck and all those guys were living in Europe. I mean, before you went to Berkeley, did you have a chance to see Max Roach or Dizzy? I mean, how connected and how close? I mean, just how much did you get the chance to feel those original masters of?
Oh, that's actually, I was really lucky because in Hamburg there was a club called Dennis Swing Club. Dennis was from the islands, I don't know, Barbados or Jamaica, one of those. He had a club, he was a piano player. They had a house trio there with Sammy and Earl. Those were the two guys. They were also, I think they were from Barbados or Jamaica, I don't know, one of those countries. They're all from the islands. But there was a club, and they would have a house trio. So they played jazz, and the good thing is, whenever a major American star was going through Hamburg and played the big concert halls, this guy Dennis would go backstage and invite them and offer them food and women and other entertainment, and then they would go to the club and hang, and eventually we would sit in, or they would sit in with us. So I'd actually met a whole bunch of these great musicians in these after-hour sessions at Dennis. I mean, a whole bunch. There's actually a great story, one of my good anecdotes, which is true, that at Dennis it was a piano player, but he was also the club owner, so he had other stuff to do. He had to attend to business, and one certain day I come in and I see Dennis waving me over, said, "Hendrik, can you cover for me at the piano?" And of course I don't play much piano. I play like every musician's piano, with a couple of chords here and there, but anyway, good enough. So I sit at the piano. And then I wonder, why does Dennis not want to play piano? The club is full and something must be going on. And then I see at the very first table, like 3 feet away from me, sits Oscar Peterson.
He was running for the hills, dude.
And Dennis said, let's Hendrik take over. So Oscar Peterson was smiling. He probably understood what was going on, and I was smiling, and that was that. So,
can you just, I mean, we're talking like, I mean, the list might be too long, but was it like Dolphy or Bobby Hutcherson or Harold Land? I mean, who did you get a chance?
The Basie band was there, for instance. Then Buddy Tate was there. Oh. I mean, I forget all these, Clark Terry, all these guys. The modern guys, not so much. That wasn't really Dennis' thing. It was really the legends, the Norman Granz guys. That's
the Philharmonic guy. Yeah.
That's what Dennis liked, and the Hampton band was there, the Basie band was there, without Basie, but the band was there, and man, I've forgotten so many.
It's okay. No, I mean I'm wondering about. I mean, if you even those traditional cats, it doesn't even matter. It's just like so much of the beautiful music that I love and you played. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about like the essence of some of those cats. I mean, a lot of them didn't talk a lot. There was a lot of nonverbal communication on the bandstand. Freddie Green, I'm not sure who was, I don't know if Sonny Payne was playing drums, but it was just, there was a fierce recognition of individuality. And I just wanted you to talk a little bit about what rubbed off on you. Because like you said, in Germany, and, there's plenty of American people that are like that too. They're very rigid. They need to compartmentalize things and have to have familiarity. And yet I'm looking at all these elders that we listed right at the beginning, and every one of them on this album has written original tunes. There's no cover tunes. And so I just wanted you to talk about individuality and when that kind of came into your consciousness as it related to music.
Well, after I came back from Berkeley, I was part of the band, and that band always invited American guys for tours. So I played with Buddy Tate, for instance, a couple of weeks in Europe. I played with Sweets Edison a couple of tours. And on those tours, you would go around the country, in your Volkswagen bus, and, play one-nighters, but then you hang with these guys the whole time. So these were actually the learning experiences, sitting in the bus with these guys and just catching the vibe, They never complained, for instance. They were all cool, And at some point, I just understood that if you actually want to work in this business and if you want to survive in the Basie band or in any other band, you can't be a pain in the ass. You know, you have to just take it as it is. And you know, I've never seen these guys complain when the European musicians or me would be already complaining about how bad the hotel is or how bad this is or that is. They would not. They just wouldn't. And, you know, they were the ones who are entitled to it, but they didn't. Because they've seen other stuff that I can't even imagine. And they were just glad to be there, you know, because they were glad they had a gig and, you know, and all that. I mean, if something really bad would happen, I mean, they're all very sensitive about getting paid. If there's a problem with that, that's the
absolutely, dude. Did you guys? Yeah, go ahead.
But other than that, short of that, you know, conditions and this and that, they were not very sensitive to it. And we've seen nasty things, but it just seems like that's something that I then learned from them. You know, if a gig is a sacred thing. You know, unless you really can't deal with it for whatever reason, you deal with it.
I mean, did they? I mean, without. Did they talk to you about some of the horror shows some of the horrible racism that they experienced?
No, they did not. I mean, it's not only, it's Buddy Tate. Then I also did with Herb Ellis. I did that with Jimmy Carr. I did a lot of these tours in Europe over the years with these guys. I never heard these stories. I heard other stuff. I heard positive stuff or, you know, whatever anecdotes that are funny or this and that. But they would not open up to me about racism. That's something that they keep amongst them if they even talk about it. They would not sit there and talk to everybody about how terrible the race relations were in America in the 40s. That is not for us. That was not for us to hear. You know, they kept that private.
Absolutely. No, I just wonder about,
and also, you know, the one thing that I learned in this country or in jazz in general is if you want to get a gig, you got to be agreeable and pleasant. Or at least not edgy, you know. And if you have a reputation of always talking about negative stuff, there's a problem. So they just don't do that. You know, they might do it with somebody they feel comfortable with, or somebody they think they have the same problem, but they would not just dish that up to just anybody. They were very private about that. They were not private about other stuff. They shared positive things and music anyway, and they loved that we their music and all that. But they would not tell you about hardships. That was not our business.
It was just a feeling of gratitude and grace. I mean, obviously, you just felt the gratitude they had. You guys might be complaining.
Well, there's a great word.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
They were cool.
Exactly.
You know, I don't know what the scientific definition of cool is, but they were just cool. You know, they were great. They were in a good mood. They played great, and if something bothered them, they would not lay it on other people. You know, cool. I don't know what cool. How do you describe cool? But they were cool. You know,
so beautiful. This is a quote from my dear uncle, and we just lost him. I'm curious if you ever crossed paths with Wolfgang Melz. He said, great bass player. He said he came to the States in 1959 by boat. It docked in New York City at 48th Street. Jan Hammer came by boat. Alan Broadbent did. I know they're a little bit older than you. How did you wind up ultimately... I know you're going to say plain, but maybe not. I mean, how did you get to Berkeley? Why did you even... obviously, there were only a couple of real jazz schools. I'm just curious as to ultimately what made you decide that you wanted to come to Berkeley.
Well, Berkeley, first of all, if you look from the outside to America, internationally, Berkeley is by far the most known and the most famous of the jazz schools. Americans know about North Texas and University of Miami and all the other, and Juilliard and this and that, and maybe it changed a little bit, but back in the day, it was Berkeley. Berkeley was the jazz school. And Berkeley offered a major in vibes. I was a vibes player at that time, but I'm not a percussionist. You know, I'm not a classical percussionist, or I'm also not a drummer. I'm a vibes player. And in most of the other schools, you would have to take percussion, and I don't care. I don't want to play bongos and timpanis. It's not my instrument. I don't care about that. You know, I don't want to be a symphonic player. That's not what I do.
Yeah.
So Berkeley offered vibes as a major. So that when I found that out, said I'm going to Berkeley.
And talk first of all was like was Swallow and Sco there? Was Swallow teaching? I'm trying to figure out the class that you were in when you got there, because that was like 75.
They were gone or older, but my contemporaries are, for instance, Ralph Moore, who played on the
Oh
Tonight
my
Show.
God, monster!
We had a
Yeah,
band together. Donald Harrison. Those are the guys that were Dave Kaikowski. That's the generation. Smitty Smith. That's the guys that were in my whatever. We hung, or at least we met, or we were there at the same time.
I'm curious. I'm just.
And Gary Burton was actually on a leave of absence when I was there. I studied with somebody else. There was no Gary Burton. He was still officially in the school, but he wasn't there when I was there.
So we're talking like 78, 77, that kind of?
77 to 80.
Got it. 70s. So I guess Matheny might have been there, or maybe that was after Matheny. But Hendrik, this is just really important because, I believe, I'm not sure, maybe Herb Pomeroy was still there, or
yes, he was there.
And he had a big band that played every week. And the funny thing is that, to me, like nowadays, there's such a supply and demand issue because you have all these amazing players with technique and facility, and they got nowhere to play. And yet, I believe that you were playing in the Combat Zone in Boston. Can you talk about some of the live gigs? To me, it was just...
there were lots of clubs. I had a band, the Back Bay Boppers.
Oh, my God. Dude, get me the tapes of that, dude. I need the tapes.
I got to revive that band. The name is too good to...
That is so... The Back Bay... Dude, I went to BU. I know what you're talking about, man. I love it.
And Ralph Moore was in it, right?
Oh, my God, man. Hero, dude.
There were lots of clubs. There was Poo's Pub and 1369, Riles, and I forgot other ones, but there were gigs, definitely. There were lots of clubs. So we played. I mean, not all the time. We were still, Berkeley was still the most important thing. Also, if I had a gig, I had to figure out how to get the vibes there. I don't even remember how I did that. Must have hit cab or something. I have no idea.
That's pretty amazing.
There were gigs, definitely. Oh, yeah, Boston. I like Boston. I still like Boston. Boston is not New York, and there's, not the same amount of gig or musicians, but Boston has a jazz history, for sure.
When you got there and started playing live, jazz was definitely sort of at the tail end of its quote-unquote American popularity at that time. But still, we weren't like marinating in, and unfortunately just having to take these sonic baths and synthesizers and, drum machines. It was a couple years before that. Obviously, disco hadn't completely infiltrated, the ears of the people. Can you just talk about the vitality of jazz when you got to America? It's just so funny now because it just seems like so much of the so many times I go to see jazz and it doesn't relate to the burning quality of the music that I listened to when you were coming up and also playing. It seems to be...
we were still in the late 70s. So, Michael Brecker didn't make his impact yet and all these guys. So jazz hasn't changed that much. It was still, if it was straight ahead, it was still Dexter and Art Pepper. I saw all these guys live. I saw Sonny Stitt. These guys were live. And if you wanted to hear jazz, you could hear these guys still. They were still there. And the people admired them, that we were still in the era before it changed drastically to more modern stuff. That hadn't happened yet. So there was jazz was not as popular as your regular pop music or country and western or rock or whatever. If it was still jazz, a minority or whatever music for special people. But if you listen to jazz, you could still listen to the traditional mainstream version of it. I heard Art Pepper, Dexter, Sonny Stitt, all these guys, James Moody. I heard all of them in the Boston jazz clubs. Sometimes, most of the time, with local rhythm section, Ray Santisi.
Oh my God, Ray! That was the other name. Him and Pomeroy were at Berkeley. That was Santisi.
Pomeroy and there was still jazz hadn't. We are talking. This is now 40 years ago.
I know.
And more. Jazz was still. That was also pre-Marcellus, and pre this and that, and maybe there were a couple of young lions, but that was even before that movement. That was still another era.
Well, we're talking to a master, Hendrik Meurkens, and were you playing primarily unamplified vibes? I mean, I know that Abercrombie years before in Boston had a group with electric vibes. Burton toyed with that, and just being a cat from that time, I mean, you couldn't get away from Brothers Johnson, Sly Stone, all that electric funk. I'm just curious about part of when you talk about the old guard, when I think of Sonny Stitt, I just think acoustic. I think
definitely acoustic. I mean, I play vibes because I started liking, my first guy was Hampton, and then Baggs, Milt Jackson. Those are my guys, and I love the sound of acoustic vibraphone. That's why I play that thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care for electric sounds, especially not on vibes. I definitely played acoustic. I had my Massa that I bought there, and that is still my best instrument. That's in Europe now, but that is of all the vibraphones that I owned, that has the best sound because it's from a certain era. No, I my acoustic vibes to the gig in probably a cab, if I remember right.
I want you to remember. I want the Back Bay boppers, man. You were definitely folding that stuff up and putting it in the trunk, I think.
Must be, yeah. I mean, but also the old cabs were bigger, those old
That's
cabs,
right.
there was room for that stuff. I must have been a cab. I don't see what else. I didn't have a car. It must have been the cab. No idea. So, but yeah. No, definitely acoustic. If it's a big club and they have a microphone, then I play through the microphone, but I'm not schlepping an amp. Vibes is actually pretty loud. The way I play it, it's pretty loud. Yeah.
I completely, this is kind of in the weeds a little bit, but I think you're going to understand what I'm saying. I remember Emil Richards, again, you're not a percussionist, but Emil was the time he did all the percussion in Hollywood, but before that, was on the road with Shearing, Sinatra playing vibes. Al McKibben was on bass, and he was obsessed like you were with Milt Jackson. And he said that Milt had this, at least in the 50s, he had the sorriest looking vibes you'd ever seen in your life. And actually, I saw them in Mickey Roker's basement, rest in peace. But they were just like this sorry, sagging thing of. And everyone's like, how the heck? And then he started to play them, and sonically, just through his soul, his life force, he brought that stuff to life. And it was just like, and Harold Jones, the great drummer, great bassy drummer, he talked about being in clubs in Chicago with a guitar and organ. Again, it was electrified, but he didn't have any amplification, and he had to generate volume or through his soul, through life force. And I just wanted you to talk to younger cats because most people would think you have to pound the instrument, whether it's the vibes or the drums. But I just see it over and over again. The cats with the life force can generate sonically through that. And I wanted you to talk about, maybe a situation where you couldn't really, you were in a club, the sound wasn't that great, you definitely weren't amplified, but yet, Yeah,
but I don't worry about that because the vibes naturally sounds good. The vibes doesn't need help. You don't need to put reverb on the vibes. You don't need to. The vibes is a great, pleasant sounding instrument. If somebody can't hear it, that's not my problem. Come closer to the vibes.
I dig, man. What about you though? What about?
I have a pretty loud sound. I don't know why that is. Must be my touch, my attack. Not that I try to, but I do sound pretty loud. I guess I never had a problem. If somebody hears the drums and the piano, they definitely hear me too. I definitely cut through. So this amplification thing is maybe in large halls, but in a regular club, they hear me, man. And sometimes they move away from the vibes because I'm too loud. So
I guess maybe it was not very well worded. I mean, like the idea that, like, how do you account for the fact that Milt had the sorriest looking vibes, and yet when he played them, he brought them to life. Only somebody.
Yeah, but that is the mystery that we don't understand. Why did Johnny Hodges sound that way? Johnny Hodges could take any alto, any mouthpiece, any reed from anybody and sound like that.
Unbelievable.
Harry Carney could take. Oh, there's actually a great recording. I think it's either Stan Getz or some other tenor and Gary Mulligan, and they change horns. The tenor player plays Barry, and Gary Mulligan plays the tenor.
Oh, my God.
Gary Mulligan sounds like Gary Mulligan on the tenor. You know right away. and vice versa. It's not the instrument. Never was.
So,
Never was.
Hendrik, just humor me. We call it a mystery. You've obviously spent time, as I have, thinking about it. What is the best? How do you describe that? Is it soul? Is it pulse? I mean, what is it that makes somebody have that? Because you could make the argument that any serious musician, anyone that's done their time has some of that in them. And to me, it's a mystery. You can't quantify it, but
it's the same as having a voice. If you listen to somebody, you can tell, oh, that's Ronald Reagan, or that's Danny DeVito.
Right.
You don't have to see the person. You listen to half a sentence, and you know. So why is that? Because of the vocal cords, or because of the nose, or because of the throat, or the tongue? Who cares? It's something that comes out. On the instrument, it's the same thing. You hear something, and your body will find a way to make it happen. If it's vibes, then it's the wrists and the way you attack. And if it's a horn, then it's the way you form your mouth. We don't know these things physiologically, but what I know is the brain wants it to sound a certain way, and the body will make that happen. I mean, how about these guys, impersonators that can impersonate any, like the new guy on Saturday Night Live who does a great Donald Trump.
That's right.
How does he do that? His brain finds a way to shape his throat and voice and I don't know what to sound like that. I mean, I don't know how, but the brain knows what has to come out of it. And for people with a great musical voice, it's the same thing. There's just the sound. I've seen Milt Jackson on videos sitting in somewhere in Bulgaria or Czechoslovakia on another vibraphone with other mallets, and it sounds like Milt Jackson.
No, but let me ask.
Yeah,
I did. No, it's beautifully articulated. It's a DNA strand kind of thing. But can you talk about a time when you showed up for a gig and your vibes didn't make it and you had to? I mean, I remember Joe Sample, the great piano player, saying when the Crusaders were playing the Chitlin circuit way back when, he'd be like, I wonder what dog de jour I'm going to play today. Missing keys. Did you have a situation like that where you were like?
No, the thing is, back in the day, there were not a whole lot of vibraphones in clubs or halls. You had to bring your own shit. Very rarely did I play somebody else's vibraphone. These days, it's different because vibes is more established. In New York, for instance, Smalls and Mesro, they do have a set of vibes, and then I play the vibes that's there. But back in those days, you had to bring your vibes. Very rarely would you find a vibraphone there. And if there was a vibraphone, it probably was in good shape because it probably was a big hall. So that problem was not really one of my problems. But, man, I've played tours in Russia like 10 years ago, around 10 years ago, and we were in the backwoods of Siberia somewhere, and there's a vibraphone, and it's half fallen apart. But my Russian friends, being Russian and being survivors, they got tape and hammers and rubber bands and this and that, and made it happen.
Oh, this is so great, dude. This is so. They triaged it together for Hendrik.
Yeah, of course. I told them, this has to be there, this is to be there, and this can't be too tight. And then they did it, and then we laughed and we played. I don't care, man. I care if you put out a contract or a rider and you ask for something and they don't do it. But I care because that's attitude. That's just bad business. But, man, you can never blame the instrument, man.
No, absolutely.
I believe you that.
Well, I dig. Did you get an offer to play with a band in the States, or did you? And why did you go back to Germany? Most of the cats, even Vinny Colaiuta was at Berkeley around that time, but he jumped on a bus and went to Los Angeles.
Well, it was also a visa thing. When I went to Berkeley, I was here on a student visa, and that was done when I finished Berkeley, so I could have either stayed illegally, which is not really my thing. So I went back to Germany. I also felt I wasn't ready. I wanted to woodshed. So I came back to Germany, lived there for a few years, went to Brazil, lived there for a few years, and then at some point I got a recording contract with Concord Records. I was still living in Berlin. And when we had that recording contract, I told them, now that I'm on your label, it would be nice if I could come to the States and promote the album. So they gave me an artist visa, or they arranged for an artist visa, and that's how I finally came to this country.
So you're not even sure how did they conquer? Was it Eddie Jefferson? I'm trying to figure out who was running that label, but
Yeah, Carl Jefferson.
Carl Jefferson. Thank you, not Eddie. So you're telling me that just one day they called your landline and were like, "Hey, man."
No, I sent them something. But I sent them my Brazilian stuff. I know Carl Jefferson, they had the Hunted label, they had Cartier, they had,
that's right.
Tito Puente, and I don't know who else. They were into Latin stuff besides just straight ahead. So I sent them my Brazilian project, and they dug it. They said, cool. They bought it. And then they gave me a contract. Yeah, that was one lucky move in my life. It's getting signed by Concord Records. Everybody has some story. Somebody gets discovered, and I landed a deal with Concord because I sent something to them that they liked. So, and that changed my whole life. Then, next thing came the artist visa, and then we moved to the States and made the visa and a green card, and then the green card into citizenship, and the rest is history.
Well, luck is the residue. Some Branch Rickey said luck is the residue of design. So, I mean, I agree with you. But I guess maybe did you have a chance? I mean, I've interviewed João Donato. I've interviewed Lalo Schifrin. Did you go into the belly of the beast? Were you in the Amazon, or were you mainly in Rio? Can you talk about?
I was in Rio. Because that is where in those days the shit was happening back in the day. I'm not really, I'm not a scientist of Brazilian music.
Absolutely not. No.
I like my samba jazz. Brazilian music is huge. There is so much stuff in Brazilian music, and I don't really need all of it, and I don't use all of it. I have a very specific thing that I like, my samba jazz version, and that was happening in Rio back in the day. And also, there's the whole image of Rio with the sugar loaf and all that, and the corcovado. So I was very happy in Rio. So I lived there for a year and then came back to Germany.
I mean, as best as you can you talk about how you use the flavors of the samba within, to the person who's going to listen to this in 50 years and hasn't checked out your discography, how did you fuse the samba rhythms into your version of jazz or music?
Well, I don't really do much. I call Brazilian musicians and they do it. I chose the tunes, or I write the compositions, and then I get a rhythm section that knows how to play that stuff. I am not Brazilian. I'm the first one to tell you I'm not Brazilian. So this is not really authentic, pure Brazilian jazz at all. It's my version of it, but it works. I have a certain taste that works, but I still need a rhythm section that brings it to life. And I always found the greatest guys back in Rio anyway. In Berlin, I had one, and then in New York, there's a handful on each instrument, or more than a handful on each instrument that plays my music. So the band is as important as the music.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, how would you describe your version of it? I mean, it's original tunes. Where's the pulse of the?
Well, samba jazz. There's something called samba jazz, which is really kind of bebop-ish.
Yes.
Over samba jazz rhythm. Claudio Ditti is the king of that.
That's right.
Anything you listen from Claudio Ditti, that is classic samba jazz, and that will be where I see myself, or what I am trying to do, which is really a traditional form of straight-ahead jazz on top of Brazilian rhythms. I don't really take it too far out. That's not what I'm interested in, and I'm definitely also not very traditional Brazilian because I'm a jazz musician. But the samba jazz thing in the Claudio Ditti, vein, that is where I'm going. So the compositions matter, but it really matters that you have bass, drums, and piano who can play in that style. And then it also matters what you play on top of that. So that's also not unimportant. But if you have the wrong rhythm section, you don't have samba jazz.
Who was your vibes teacher at Berkeley, by the way?
Oh, there were several. There was Mike Hatfield at Saindon, Ted Wolf. It changed. I was there for 6 or 8 semesters, several ones. None of them is really too much known outside of Boston.
No, but the reason I ask is so many. I remember Mark Levine, rest in peace, the great piano player, trombone player. He'd show up at Jackie Byard's. Jackie wasn't even teaching at Berkeley, but he lived there and he was giving lessons. And ultimately he said, he'd play drums, and Mark would come in and get on the piano, and he'd say, "Let's play Cherokee in all 12 keys." And then around E or F or something, Mark would fall apart, and Jackie would say, "Okay, now you know what you need to work on. We'll see you next week." And
I'm not really the vibes teachers were not that important. There's also another thing, which is Berkeley is very much in the Gary Burton vein. The vibes players are very good Gary Burton influence, which is a 4-mallet approach. I'm a 2-mallet player.
No, but this is my. I'm sorry. I wanted to get at.
And so the vibes lessons weren't really the centerpiece of my education. We did it. We played together. It's fine. I had fun, but I picked up most of the vibes stuff from listening to other players, and I studied privately with Bob Mover, the saxophone player who used to live in Boston.
Wow.
So Berkeley was great for ensembles. Berkeley was great for arranging, for theory, and just to hang with people. But the vibes playing itself is not really a Berkeley thing. First of all, I already kind of knew what I wanted back in the day myself. I'm pretty much a self-taught dude. And then I picked it up from other instruments because I transcribed Charlie Parr and Dexter Gordon and all that, a little bit Mill Jackson. But I'm not really a vibes player, a 4-mallet vibes player. That was never really my thing.
Absolutely, man. No, what I wanted to get at was this, is that because you were self-taught, and I'm guessing probably you learned to hear music before you learned to read it, most of the cats, your ears were huge. Even before you came to Berkeley, all the cats, the generation before you and yours, could hear everything. Today,
I don't know if my ears are that great. They're probably.
But here's my point.
But I knew what I wanted. I always had the direction.
Here's my point. Is that a lot? I don't care what instrument it is. Cats today are learning to read music before they're learning to hear it. So guys like Gary Bartz, from a horn point of view, says their ears are locked, and as a result. A lot of modern jazz, I hear a lot of homogenized sound. I can't tell who anybody is anymore. And I just wonder what your advice would be, because we're saturated in visual content now. We're saturated, and so much of it is...
advice, nobody would have any use for my advice because it's another era. We moved on from that. The classic period of jazz, 30s, 40s, 50s, you need to have a sound. If you didn't have a sound, you didn't have a gig.
That's right.
Johnny Hodges, Harry Carney, Benny Goodman, Louis Armstrong, all these dudes, Roy Eldridge, they had a sound. So they became stars because they had a sound. They were recognizable. That is completely unimportant these days. Today, you have to do something flashy that catches the attention in less than 10 seconds, and then you have a career. Times have changed. And if I tell somebody to work on the tone or something, they will probably not have the patience to go through with it because they have to update their TikTok. So my advice is useless.
Well, no. First of all, I'm not going to let you get away with that. I want you. The question is this: hungry cat doesn't have a lot of dough, searching for his individual sound. What are the things that somebody in your mind, if they have the patience, if they have the drive and the gumption, what are the things that they need to do in order to at least attempt to cut above the morass of what everybody else is doing on that apparatus?
Well, it has to come from within. Usually, if you're a jazz musician, there must be a reason for it.
Yes.
You don't get born with a saxophone in your mouth. There is something you heard that you liked. Otherwise, you wouldn't play jazz. There must be something that initiated the process. So you have to search for yourself, who do you like? Do I like Dexter Gordon, or do I like David Liebman, or what? And then try to find people that you like, and then you will move in that direction. But if there's any advice, then the advice would be, go back a few decades. Don't just listen to the people that are hot now, but listen to the people that you think are ancient history, because that's where your idols learn from. Go back to Dexter Gordon and Sonny Rollins and Burt and Coltrane, or even better, Johnny Hodges and older Louis Armstrong, because your idols learn from those. So, you're already this is already third-hand information. You know, in these days, everything's on YouTube. Everything's available. You can, if there's a recording, you can find it. There's no excuse to not check out the old dudes anymore. But you have to.
The problem is, though, is that we're drowning in content, and most of it's so mediocre. So you really have to be a seeker. I mean, when I saw this record from how do you say, Domicile? Is that how you pronounce it?
Domicile, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, when I found this record, I mean, how many people would have actually known? I saw Wolfgang Downer and flipped out. And like, I mean, you have to really seek, because before, I don't care if it was a jazz record or an R&B soul record, there was a certain bar you had to meet in order for it to get produced and published. And now it's like you can do anything. So I just, to me, do you worry? I mean, it's the wrong word. I mean, you got to sing for your supper still. Even though we want to be in the moment, what are the biggest issues facing melodic improvisation or instrumental music in the 21st century, according to Hendrik?
Well, I mean, you just said it. What is melodic improvisation? I don't hear any melodic improvisation.
Right.
I hear harmonic improvisation.
That's right.
Pattern instrumentation. Melodic is almost a thing from the past. But man, that's not my problem. If people don't do it or if they don't like it, it's their loss. I mean, I cannot teach somebody to like melody. If they are going in another direction, yeah, too bad. I know what I like. And I learn from that. And if I have students, then I point out to them. Then I say, yes, Wes Montgomery, that is the perfect guitar solo. Slow building up, then octaves, then chord solos over the course of 10 choruses. This is probably the best way to ever do a solo. Try to top that. But, if you don't have a student that wants to listen to that, then they're on their own. Man, times have changed so many times. We are now 2020s, I'm talking about 90 years ago, the 1930s, when sound was on the menu. But it's always good to go back to that era, because that is when everything started, So if that would be my advice, to listen to the old guys, and you'd be surprised. Maybe there's something you actually like.
I feel like I saw this somewhere, but I saw a picture. Did you play with Sonny Chirac and Pharaoh ever?
No.
Never. Okay, that was somebody else then. It's tripping me out. I mean, Roy Haynes is still alive. That guy was in Louis Russell's Armstrong from the 40s. It's just like, do you have a how much do you care about seeing this tradition or music? Again, things have changed.
I think it's the most important thing. I mean,
why is it the most important thing?
Because these are the original cats. It's like talking to somebody who was there at the Last Supper, and not having 2,000 years of Bible translation through the, revised by politicians and translated in the bad way. It's like talking to one of the 12 disciples. What actually happened? What did you have for dessert? Did Jesus, did he burp? Did he not burp? Did he pick his nose or whatever? These guys were there. So if you are really interested, you go back to the source. And for me, it was Jimmy Cobb. Jimmy Cobb, the great drummer.
Was my hero. I interviewed him. Oh, my God.
I had several tours with him. I did 3 or 4 albums, and I hung out with him, and that was my strongest connection to that era. So if you are blessed and you still find them, so far, I think left is Sonny Rollins and Roy Haynes and George Coleman. And I wonder if there's anybody else.
Maybe Houston Person, although
Houston Person, yes.
Yeah, and
he's not quite as old.
Exactly.
Those were guys from the most important period, the 50s, and even Roy Haynes, even back in the 40s with Charlie Parker. The guy played with Charlie Parker. Jesus Christ.
Well, let me ask you, the other guy who hung with Parker and I believe is still kicking it around is Terry Gibbs. Yes,
Terry Gibbs. Well, actually, man, he's actually a good friend. I talked to Terry Gibbs a lot on the phone.
Yeah, no, we did. He's a. I mean, that dude used to get in Charlie Parker's face because he's like, "Why are you such a junkie, man?" He's like, "You're such a." I mean, that it was like, but those. I mean,
but that's exactly what we talk. I don't know, maybe every couple of weeks, and then it's like an hour. He tells me stories, and I listen. That for me is. It's like university. It's going to Harvard. Having an hour on the phone with Terry Gibbs is like doing your doctorate at MIT. So,
dude, it's just been. I mean, it's so
because you understand so much about the times, not just the notes, but what happened and how things were the way they were. If you don't talk to people from that time, you don't understand. It's. I mean, I'm already the third or fourth hand, but I talked to Jimmy Carver, I played with him, and Terry Gibbs and these guys, and Buddy Tate. That's 1920s.
Oh my Lord!
And Sweets Edison's, and you learn things. It's not about the notes. It's about how to live and how to be and all that.
Absolutely, it's your life story coming out through you. I mean, you look at. Can you just talk about how you learned to get out of your own way or manage your ego? I think there's a lot of people today who, they want to show off their facility and their chops, and I wind up staring at the wall. And to me, it's like you could play one note, and if it feels good, that's all that matters. With your gig coming up and stuff, I just wonder if you can talk about like staying humble. I mean, can you just talk about your evolution in that sense? Were you ever somebody that was a little bit cocky and maybe?
Oh, definitely, and I probably still am. It's a personality thing, but you also a very clear message. If you are cocky or if you have a big fat ego, that will show in the amount of resonance. If people call you or not. It's just there is the message is clear. It comes back clear. So you will know. If it works or it doesn't work. People will let you know. And if you want to work as a leader and you can get the gigs yourself, you can be an asshole because you're the leader. But if you're a sideman and you gotta be pleasant so that the band leader wants to call you again because he doesn't have to. I mean, there's no real loyalty. It's a business. Like Art Blakey let the people go after a couple of years or earlier to get the next guy in the band, and they didn't even know what was happening. So it's not about a lifelong friendship, it's a gig. And if somebody else comes along that fits it better, there you go. So you learn how to not be let go.
I love that. Can you just talk about a little bit about your gig coming up? I got to tip my cap to Jim Igo.
On Tuesday, we're here in New York City at the Zinc Bar. We're doing a tribute to Roberto Menescal, which is one of the original bossa nova legends. He wrote a couple of the main bossa nova hits that made him actually rich, or at least comfortable.
Yes.
So he is one of the guys that was there at the time, and he's a contributor, and he's one of the major guys. So we are doing a few of his tunes and play samba jazz from that period, honoring the traditional samba jazz.
Did you ever meet or collaborate with João Gilberto, Jobim, or any of those? Like, did you get it? Because you talked about some of these original Sweets Edison, some of these original guys from the 20s and 30s and 40s. But what in terms of the Brazilian cats? How far does the lineage go back for Hendrik?
Yeah, but the Brazilian cats is like João Gilberto and Jobim. Those are, one is a singer, one is a songwriter. They are not really samba jazz guys.
Right.
You might meet them socially or whatever if you're lucky. João Gilberto, of course, they had no chance because he was locked up in a room.
He was such
somewhere.
a freak, crazy dude.
Yeah. But the other guys, it's not really. The samba jazz guys are not the famous ones. They are just the good musicians that you meet. Brazil is a singers culture. They are the songwriters and the singers. The instrumentalists back in the day were not a big deal. I was hanging with the instrumentalists, colleagues, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
The stars were doing something else. The instrumentalists played for the stars. It's like you have a gig with Tony Bennett or something, but you hang with the other musicians. So I didn't really meet the great famous guys, but I recorded with Menescal, that I did. And when I lived there, I had a steady gig, so I met a few of them. But it's not like you hang out with Jobim and then you go to lunch and you record an album. They are also on another level. They were and are national heroes. You can't just You don't just meet them on the street
No,
corner.
I did. Also, one final thing before I let you go. Were you too young? When did you first? I mean, I was doing a documentary. I did about 4 dozen radio interviews with cats for a documentary that will probably never come out on Stan Getz. I spent 4 days at his estate in Shadowbrook with Monica, his wife, second wife, and from Ron Carter to Huey Lewis to whoever. When The Girl from Ipanema hit, it just fundamentally changed all genres of music. I just wonder when you first heard that, and if you sort of scoffed at that early on, and then sort of came back later when you became fanatical about bossa or
When
something.
I heard it, it wasn't that old. I heard it also in the mid-'70s, like at the same time that I discovered jazz, I also discovered bossa nova the same way. There was a record, an LP somewhere, and the mid-'70s were like not even 10 years away from the height of bossa nova.
Absolutely.
The height of the bossa nova was the mid-'60s, so it was still kind of fresh and there, and I liked bossa nova, and it stayed with me since then. Bossa nova became samba jazz because bossa nova is vocal music. I wanted the instrumental version, so yeah, it is a parallel thing. My straight ahead jazz thing and my Brazilian thing kind of started at the same time, and I went to both places to the source because that's what I believe is important. I came here because of jazz, and I went to Brazil because of the music. You cannot really catch the music if you don't know the culture.
Hendrik Meurkens, you you chewed all my questions, spit them out with ease. It's such an honor to connect with you, man. I really hope I get a chance to get back to the East Coast. And I don't know, did you ever make it out to Arizona to play?
I did play at the Instrument Museum a few years ago.
Oh, you did?
Yep.
Yeah,
I played there once. Nothing is scheduled right now, but it can happen.
Hey, man, I just wanted to say thank you so much and for your contributions. I hope you have a great gig, and maybe we'll do this again someday.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, brother. Have a great day, man.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.